electronics are omnipresent, serving as both as competitive factor for business success and as a crucial lever in climate protection. Semiconductors, so-called microchips, are of high importance, as they are key components of nearly every electronic product, such as household and entertainment electronics, computer hardware, data centers, mobile and power networks, and many more. Infineon is a German company and ranks among the top semiconductor manufacturers globally. With over 56,000 employees, 59 R&D and 19 production sites, and a revenue of over 14 billion euros in 2022, it holds a significant position in the industry. Sabine Herrlichka has been the CEO of Infineon in Austria for almost 10 years. She also serves as the Vice President of the Federation of Austrian Industries and as the Vice Chair of the Austrian Council for Research and Technology Development. In autumn 2021, she opened a new chip factory at the Infineon site in Villach with an investment volume of 1.6 billion euros. Infineon Austria is also one of the strongest research companies in Austria. Furthermore, Infineon Group plans to establish another chip factory worth approximately 5 billion euros in Dresden, Germany by the year 2026. Today, I have the privilege and pleasure of speaking with Sabine Herrlichka about chip manufacturing, global competitiveness, and the importance of responsible and resilient supply chains. Sabine, thank you very much for taking the time to share your insights and perspectives with us.
With pleasure.
Let's start with global competitiveness. Europe's global competitiveness and sovereignty depends on key technologies. Therefore, research and innovation are important, but also production capacities. What is Europe's global position in chip manufacturing?
Europe is currently positioned with a bit less than 10% of global chip manufacturing. And in the course of the currently negotiated CHIPS Act, the ambition is to reach 20% of global chip manufacturing by 2030. This is highly ambitious. We are talking about a market of some $550 billion worldwide. And this market is going to double. So the ambition to double from 10% to 20% is ambitious, but in a market that is also doubling. So it's really, really ambitious.
This position of Europe in a global scale seems to be small with 10% right now in a quantitative view. Is it also small in a qualitative view, or does European chip manufacturing have any kind of unique position because of the quality of the chips?
I think this is the most important aspect. Over decades, chip manufacturing has been transferred to Asia, for instance, in sectors where it's really about competition, primarily for price. But in the area of innovation, but of course, framework conditions are always important in a global industry. But in the area of innovation, Europe has some outstanding positions and competences. I give you a few examples. One of them, referring to my company, Infineon Technologies, is particularly in the power electronics sector. What is power electronics? This is the key technology that unlocks the potential of energy efficiency. Therefore, we say these are the energy-saving chips. And if you think of a Green Deal, for instance, energy efficiency is a key element. And as Infineon, as European headquartered company, we do have 20% of global market share in this sector of power electronics, which is so important for the implementation, for the successful implementation of the Green Deal, but also all the other regions that know that the green transformation is essential and therefore have set up programs. So power electronics is one such sector. Second, I would mention sensors in various fields. And the third one is security. So security in a digitalized world I mean, this goes without comment to understand that this is essential. And in these sectors, there are European competences and European companies who do have leading positions.
You already mentioned climate change. The past years were shaped by disruptions such as the COVID crisis, climate change, Russia's war against the Ukraine. Now we have the rise of AI. Did these events change Europe's position in a global technological competition? And what were the consequences of these disruptions for your sector?
I think the most significant change was that the awareness towards this key enabling technology of microelectronics, semiconductors or chips, has increased significantly. Why? In the pandemic, it became obvious all of a sudden there was this chip shortage for a number of reasons, but all of a sudden, even consumers noticed that the waiting period to get specific products that depend on chips became much longer. And the war for chips, the chip shortage, all of a sudden contributed to a broader understanding how essential this technology is. Why? Because you find microelectronics chips in basically all the tools, devices, processes you're confronted with every day. If you use your smartphone, for instance, with the microphones, with antennas, energy management, if you take a train, for instance, or if you use your car, or in your home, for instance, if you use a credit card, you find technologies. So life, as we know and appreciate it, depends to a large extent on this key enabling technology, microelectronics. And to give you a figure, some roughly 50% of the global GDP depends on microelectronics. A small market of those roughly 550 billion, like a triangle, but the broader application markets depend on this key enabling technology. And therefore, a lot of regions have focused also their awareness and taken measures to strengthen their capabilities in R&D, but also in manufacturing in microelectronics.
As a consequence of this awareness, the European Chip Act aims at strengthening Europe's technological leadership and support the green and digital transition. It will mobilize more than 43 billion euro of public and private investments and aims at substantially increasing the production capacities of semiconductors in Europe. To your opinion, is the European Chip Act only about public support of investment, or is there more about it?
I think the fact that Europe has started the negotiations, the proposal, of course, by the European Commission, and then the negotiations on the CHIPS Act is a good signal. It's a strong signal, and it's a good signal, and it's a necessary signal. Every region nowadays invests in microelectronics. The US chips some 52 billion. China invests some roughly 150 billion over the next years in microelectronics. South Korea, India, Japan, you name it. Yeah? So good signal that Europe takes this challenge and has come up with the proposal and now the negotiations on the CHIPS Act. Now, the CHIPS Act is a European instrument, which means that 43 billion have been mentioned, as you say. Those 43 billion consist of 3.3 billion for joint research. The rest focused on innovative investments has to be financed by member states. So this is not a joint European budget. The CHIPS Act provides in the sector of innovation investments. The CHIPS Act provides a framework in order to be able to support investments based on European state aid rules. But each of the member states has to finance it itself. And this is quite a challenge, because this means that it might be easier for larger member states as compared to smaller member states. And it opens a door towards a competition between various member states. So, as much as I appreciate that Europe has taken the initiative here, as always, it depends to a large extent on how the CHIPS Act is going to be implemented. Europe is very much in competition with other regions, and therefore my hope would be that the European CHIPS Act provides a framework, but also helps in coordinating European measures, because only as Europe we are able to successfully compete with other regions. So just thinking at the level of member states would not be enough.
If Europe tries to foster its sovereignty by building chip factories, should this ambition also include a better control of the supply of critical raw materials upstream?
Yeah, so it's very much about the value chains, which includes raw materials and again, the critical components of raw materials. I mean, the Ukraine war demonstrated that it's not only, let's say, strategic components you would have thought of, but just the scarcity of some of the components make them critical. But typically the strategic elements of the value chains, and as such, of course, also the raw materials play a crucial role.
How could a strategic raw material policy on European level look like? How could Europe regain control over whole value chains?
Yeah, I think the first step is always to analyze the value chain and see what kind of strategic components are necessary and where are we positioned. And then to take smart measures, either building up capacity in Europe, or, which is the smarter approach, to build alliances, because many of those sectors are global industries. And I am a strong believer in globalization. I don't think it makes too much sense to reshore a lot, because the ultimate consequence is that the end products are getting more expensive for the end consumers. Yeah? So we have to find a smart approach to make globalization further possible. And this always builds on own strengths. In Europe, we very much talk about resilience, which is good. We do have a clear fear of dependencies from others, but in sectors where we do have strengths, others depend on us. And therefore, I think resilience has to be built on own strengths. And therefore, I think it's so important to be aware of our own strengths and then to further strengthen our own strengths. This is the basis of further successful, a successful framework for globalization.
You mentioned European own strengths, where when we depend on imports on the one hand, others depend on our strength. What are European strengths in the digital industry?
Yeah, for instance, in my sector, power electronics. We do have those energy saving chips. We have a world market share of 20%. The next competitor is roughly at 10%. In order to unlock the huge potential of energy efficiency, this kind of technology is going to be essential. Yeah. And to give you an example of the huge potential of energy efficiency, if you combine the traditional way of energy generation, transport, transmission, and in the end, what ends up at your end product, at your computer or smartphone or whatsoever, you lose 70% of the energy. 70%. In the combination of renewable energy generation, wind, photovoltaic, intelligent energy transmission, and what you find ending up at your device, you can use 70%. And this makes a huge difference. And this is possible in this combination of renewables plus intelligent treatment of electricity, and in this case, energy saving chips, as an example.
I think it's a perfect example of synergies between sustainability on the one hand and competitiveness on the other. More in general, when we say there is competitiveness on a global scale and there are European values such as sustainability, responsibility, or human rights, do you have the impression that in general these are trade-offs, or are these examples of a synergetic way really important already? Or is this just a minor example that you gave me with the energy saving chips?
This is the huge challenge with Europe coming up with the Green Deal. The Green Deal is major initiative. I mean, this is a highly ambitious political goal, a set of measures, but the core essence has to be that sustainability and competitiveness go hand in hand. Otherwise, it won't work. Because we talk about global industries. Europe is not by itself. So eventually, sustainability and competitiveness have to go together. And this is what we have to achieve. Otherwise, also the implementation of the green transformation will not work.
You have the impression that many companies already understood that sustainability and responsibility can be framed into a business case, or do you think many companies only perceive them as additional costs?
This is really the evolution over time. It has started with corporate social responsibility. Nowadays, most of the companies have come up with an own sustainability agenda. Many companies have set themselves goals. For instance, take Infineon, we want to be climate neutral by 2030, which is highly ambitious. 23 today, yeah, 2030 is very close. So many companies have understood that and are actually pretty tough in implementation. And if I would like to put it a bit more provocative, I would even say many companies, as soon as they set themselves the targets, they are really tough on implementation. They are really focused on implementation. In the political arena, yeah, take the Green Deal, take the Fit for 52. Yeah, it's very much about ideology, about coming up with more and more ambitious targets, and not too many people think about the implementation. And as industry, we are used to making things real. Only if they are real, they are effective. Yeah, so it's always about implementation. A goal by itself is not an achievement. It's always about a goal that's being implemented. And only if it's implemented, it's an achievement. And that's the difference.
You already mentioned policy. What policy framework conditions does industry need to find better synergies of responsibility and competitiveness? What should policymakers do?
Well, one of the differences that we see Europe as compared to the US in many cases. Europe works via regulation. The US works via incentives. And it's not one or the other. Ideally, it's a combination. But incentives are a very effective way of fostering implementation. So I think framework conditions that have this element of positive incentives turn out to be very successful. Of course, regulation is needed, but regulation only does not foster competitiveness.
What could such incentives look like? There is the European Chip Act, which tries to be an incentive. What other forms of incentives are needed?
The comparison currently is very much the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, which has come up with a broad set of measures that incentivize the implementation of more sustainable technologies. The Inflation Reduction Act is kind of a Green Deal in the US and builds on incentives in a broader sense. And the other aspect I really want to mention here also is, of course, legal compliance. Yes, of course, reliability. Yeah, in terms of conditions, but in combination with, let's say, flexibility of implementation and time. I mean, time for implementation is key. We live in times where you need speed. And endless discussions of years over years, not timely anymore. Digitalization, the green transformation, we are all challenged by the need of fast action, and therefore all kinds of framework conditions have to be reliable, but it's also necessary that they provide conditions that allow for fast action.
So to briefly summarize it, we need to have strategic strength in Europe. We need to collaborate, business sector and policy, but policy needs to speed up.
And there is one element in addition, which is an issue, has become an issue almost globally, which is talent. The best talent, or talent for, in my sector, technology and engineering. Mm-hmm. If you look at the major economies, there is almost everywhere a scarcity for talent in technology and engineering. And if we want to make the green transformation a success, we need the people who do that. So it's always very much about education.
Helga, thank you very much again for taking the time. It was inspiring as always talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.